Hello, good morning. I'm Reverend Sue Lynn from St. Peter's Church, and if you follow us regularly, you'll see I'm back. I've had my 2 weeks of vacation. Do I look perkier? Do I look brighter? I feel that way. So I'm bringing to you the sermon for this Sunday. If you want to worship with us, the service is also available, but this is just the sermon. And I'll be preaching today on Psalm 130. So I'm going to begin by reading you the psalm. Out of the depths I cry to you, Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. If you, Lord, kept a record of sins, Lord, who could stand? But with you there is forgiveness, so that we can with reverence serve you. I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits. And in his word I put my hope. I wait for the Lord, more than watchmen wait for the morning, more than the watchmen wait for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for with the Lord is unfailing love, and with him is full redemption. He himself will redeem Israel from all their sins. Here ends the reading. That's one of my favourite psalms, and that's why I've chosen it this morning. So we'll look into that a little bit now. So before we do that, let's pray. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So I do really like this psalm. And it's partly because it's a psalm I associate with Compline, which is the end of the day service that we have, and also the monastics often will have. It's a really quiet, pleasant service that takes you into the night in a beautiful way, under the wings of the Lord. It's lovely. But partly I like this psalm because it resonates really deeply with my own spirituality. Perhaps it does with yours too, or perhaps it will after I've finished talking about it. And I'm not going to go into great depth with this psalm. I was tempted to do that when I was preparing the sermon, but I thought, no, I just want to give you a sense of what it excites me about the sermon, and then I want to look a little bit about what type of what type of psalm it is, and then think about how that type of psalm is actually relevant for us today in the way that we choose to live our life. So that's the plan. So this psalm, it's actually really short, isn't it, compared to some? It's just 4 short couplets, but they hold in that short psalm quite a journey. It's a journey from despair through faith, through deep, deep longing for God, to a confidence in the Lord and in his promises. I've seen it described as a night of danger leading to a morning of salvation. I want you to hold on to that thought, a night of danger leading to a morning of salvation. So I'm going to look briefly into that psalm first. Now its title is A Song of Ascents. And it's one of those psalms, and there's a bit of disagreement as to what that means, whether the Psalm of Ascent was one that was said while people went up the steps to the temple, or whether it was one that was said as people went up to Jerusalem on pilgrimage. I don't think it needs to be either or. I think it can be both, and it's if you're using it on one of those journeys, then why not use it in the other? After all, we use Psalm 130 and we're half the time we're not going anywhere, or are we? We'll come to that later too. So anyway, this psalm, it begins in the depths of despair. It's a bit like, it reminds me of the book of Jonah, where right in the middle of the book of Jonah, he ends up right in the belly of the fish, right in the depths of the ocean with no hope at all. That's kind of where this psalm begins. And it says, out of the depths. So the depths can sometimes in scripture means the depths of Sheol, the place of shadows where people go when they die. So it means death, and it means darkness, it means the pit, all the despair of and dark places of human experience. And sometimes the depths means the sea, the depths of the sea, just like Jonah. But what did it symbolize? Well, I don't know how you feel about the sea. You may like it, you may not. Now I've got a love-hate relationship with the sea. It scares me quite a lot, and I'd like it to keep kind of away from me, really. But on the other hand, I like getting in it. If I've got a chance to go in for a wade or even a swim, then I'll go. Now it's really quite pleasant in this hot weather. Now, talking of the weather, here I am. I'm recording this on Thursday. On the day we're supposed to be having rain, and I know we need rain. It hasn't rained for over a month, but at the moment it's sunny and lovely. So hopefully, I don't see any sign of the rain coming in anytime soon. But in this hot weather, it's been really nice getting into the water, recreationally, shall we say. I mean, the water around here is beautiful, sparkling. It's blue. Sometimes it looks green, and it's crystal clear and absolutely teeming with life. I know how teeming it is. I trod on some of it. I was wading around Goose Spit a little while ago, and there was life everywhere. There's little fish tickling my ankles, and there was lots of starfish. It was wonderful until I trod on a flounder or something. It was a flat fish, a flounder or halibut. I don't know what it was, but it was the size of a dinner plate, and it was just under the sand, and I trod on it, and it shot off just as I trod on it. It frightened me half to death. But it gives that kind of indication of how much life there is in the waters around here. But for me, getting water on my face or over my head or sink into the depths is a terrifying picture. Because being in the depths is a place where you can't survive. I would say I'd be like a fish out of water down there, but that's a terrible analogy given the circumstances. But it's a place where all seems lost, it all seems bitter, cold and dark and distant. Being in the depths is a place that we feel far from the reach of God. Yet it isn't so, is it? Well, Genesis shows us right at the beginning of the Bible that God had no trouble subduing the waters when he created the world. Some creation myths out there that the waters are chaotic and difficult, and the creator God in these Near Eastern myths had a lot of them. They had a lot of difficulty, but God doesn't have any difficulty at all. Genesis says, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God separated the water under the vault from the water above it, just like that. And let the water under the sky, said God, be gathered in one place, and let the dry ground appear. And it was so. And he said, let the water teem with living creatures, just like it does off Goose Spit. And again it was so, and God saw that it was good. He had no trouble subduing the waters. There is no place beyond God's reach, and the psalmist knows it. There is no place beyond God's reach. Even the deep is teeming with life that he created. There is no place beyond God's reach. In fact, the deep is a place for prayer, for crying out to the Lord. The deep is the place where God hears our cries, and he meets us in the darkness and in the despair. Now, there are times I have almost rejoiced. No, I don't. Why did I say almost? I have rejoiced in the darkest and most difficult situations that I found myself in, where I had no power over the circumstances, seemingly hopeless. For real, some of the situations I've been in seemed hopeless. But the rejoicing came because I came to realize that many things that I longed for, as real closeness and sheer dependence on God and his grace, had come to me through that darkness and despair. I'd been dragged deeper into God by descending into the deep. There is no place where God is not. Now, having said that, in those dark times in my life, it did take a long time, and it took a lot of prayer and darkness and despair that I had to go through before I reached that point where there was joy in the blackness, and that became real for me. And that is the journey that this psalm is taking us on. Now, that sense of longing for God is so well portrayed in the third couplet of the psalm. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. more than the watchmen wait for the morning. Now, it may well just be but it may be a poetical construct, or it may be just to make the words work with the rhythm and scan with the tune, because of course Psalms were songs. But that repetition, more than the watchmen wait for the morning, more than the watchmen wait for the morning, fill my soul with something I almost can't describe. It works a little bit of magic in me. But it gives me this whimsical desire to long for the light, to long for the presence of God. And I have my moments, not many, or not as many as I'd like, but I have moments where I feel so close to that true and holy longing for God that this psalm instills in me. Other times I find myself doing what one of my theology lecturers when I was doing my degree used to say: if you can't long for God, then you need to long for God. And often that's where I am. I'm longing to long for God. And then at other times, okay, if I'm honest, I don't even do that. I'm just oblivious, and I don't get as far as longing for God. I just truck along fairly nicely without that deep desire and that deep pull towards that holy longing that I've been talking about. But that's why I feel blessed, I guess, in times of despair. It reminds me of that. It reminds me that I need to rejoice that all I have is God. All I need is God. All I want is God. His grace is sufficient for me, it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. But as my strength is only made perfect in weakness, as Paul says, sometimes the weakness of despair and of the depths is the catalyst that can drive someone into the waiting arms of God. But what does it mean? My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. Well, obviously the job of the watchman was to be on guard, protecting those who slept from any danger or any threat. Often the watchman would be stationed on the walls of the city, somewhere like that, where they could keep an eye, or on the edge of the camp if it was that stage of history. And we see watchmen in 2 Samuel. In chapter 13 they're mentioned where the watchmen are there and they see people approaching and they rush off immediately to tell the king, King David that was. Again in chapter 18 of 2 Samuel, a man is seen approaching and the watchman goes straight to the king to report it. But what use is the watchman unless he has someone to report to, unless the king is there to hear the cry of the watchman? Similarly, it's same thing kind of thing in Psalm 127, which reads, "Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain." Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. Well, why would my soul, or the psalmist's soul, wait for the Lord unless the Lord hears our cries, unless we know and we have faith that the Lord is there waiting to hear us? Why would you? Why would you be the watchman and wait and wait and wait if you were waiting in vain, if you had no one who would listen to you? But we wait more than the watchman waits for the morning, because the watch we keep in the darkness of the depths leads to the morning of salvation. The night of danger leads to the morning of salvation, where the light of God is so much brighter than the light of the morning. Psalm 59 says, "O my strength, I watch for you. You are, O God, are my fortress, my loving God." And back to Genesis, the dark was over the surface of the deep, but the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. And then God created light over the waters and separated it from the darkness. The night of danger gives forth to the morning of salvation. So that's a little bit of why this psalm excites me and delights me. But I want to look now a bit about what type of psalm this is. Now, as you probably know, there are many types of psalm in the Psalter. There are psalms of praise, some are prayers, petitions, there are psalms of thanksgiving in there, there's psalms of confidence in the Lord. But Psalm 130 is one of 7 psalms of penitence. They are. So this, when I did this, I thought, should I do the lottery and use these as my lottery numbers? I don't gamble. I don't do the lottery, but they just look like it. So I won't tell you to use these numbers as for the lottery. But the psalm numbers of penitence are 6, 32, 38, 51, 102, 130, and 143. So 130 is our psalm for today. But what is penitence? What do we mean by penitence? Well, what helps me when I think about penitence is the Franciscan Third Order Handbook, and I'm going to read to you a big chunk of what it says in there. So Francis referred to the Third Order as a band of penitents. In Francis' time, penitents were lay people who presented a formal statement about how they intended to live their lives to the bishop or his representative. Thereafter, the penitent wore distinctive garb and performed works of penance and charity such as fasting, prayer, care for the sick, or travellers. Penitents included married or single people living in their own homes as well as oblates attached to religious houses. Becoming an official penitent was still common practice during that time, and there existed an order of penitents in the church as part of the church. So Francis himself became a penitent in 1206. But what do we mean by penitent now? It says penitence refers to the feelings of sorrow and regret arising from knowledge and recognition of our shortcomings, which continually mark all our lives, individual and corporate, and in accepting God's forgiveness for those sins and shortcomings. True penitence is characterized by acknowledging that in all things we are totally dependent on God and God's grace. This can lead to a true metanoia, a complete turning and reorientation away from ourselves and towards God. So this is a journey, a turning, a reorientation of our lives towards God. It is knowing that it is through grace alone that we are enabled to rededicate ourselves afresh to His service. So the penitential way of life and the Franciscan way says, a personal desire therefore for us is that through true penitence and recognition of our dependence on God's grace, we may be enabled to confront the sin in ourselves and the sin of the world, to accept God's mercy and forgiveness, and thus be enabled to emerge in renewed freedom, peace and joy. Penitence and accepting God's forgiveness is a continuous process, and if we truly engage with it, becomes not a setback, but a way of life, and through which we are given the grace to gradually see our shortcomings more clearly and honestly. What does this mean in practice? A true penitent will carry within himself or herself an inner peace and happiness which others may perceive, even if they do not know its source. So from this we can see that penitence is a continuing process. It's a development. It is it's not just a feeling that we experience, but it is something that we move on. It's a choice. It's a life decision. It is that process. Right now, we as church are wounded by the realizations of what the church has done or been part of in the past. Yes, I am talking again about the part that we took in the residential schools and in the racism that we have been a part of. No, the place we're in at the moment is a painful place to be, but it's important that we are in this place and we inhabit this place right now at this time. The feelings of sorrow, the penitence that is feelings of sorrow and regret is part of that, is part of where we are at the moment. But so is the choice, the life decision and the process of change, this realization of the truth of where we've come from, of what we've done, must instill in the church. Now the trouble is we have this tendency to do penitence as an action of sorrow and of regret, placing a pair of children's shoes outside the church door, making a donation to Indigenous reconciliation. We do these things, but then the danger is we just turn and walk away and get on with our lives and kind of forget that, feel that we've done our penance, and we move on. Now there are two things here. Indigenous people have been living with the sorrow and the pain and the brokenness from what happened, and still happens to their people, and has done for years. One Indigenous person told me that a couple of their friends, non-Indigenous friends, called them in tears when they heard and they realised what was going on in the residential schools and what the church and the government had been part of. But that was their pain. What was this Indigenous person supposed to do with that? They had enough pain of their own. Expressing it and expressing sorrow helps us perhaps, but it's not going to take us very far. It's not actually bringing the healing to those people that we've injured. That person, were they supposed to hold that sorrow? I don't know what they were supposed to do with it. So the reality of the difficult thing that we have to do with penitence is we have to sit with the pain and the sorrow and the regret. We need to linger in that place, spend time in that place, and not just to try and make it all okay and move through it too soon or too quickly. Change and healing take time. Penitence is a process and a life choice, and we must dwell in it and to allow it to work in us. Now, the psalmist, notice, he's crying out in the depths, but he stays there. He stays there and he calls out to the Lord. He waits for the Lord. In that place, he waits for the Lord in that place of darkness and pain. He lingers there, knowing that the Lord is going to hear him and ultimately bring forgiveness and healing. But we're not there yet. We can't rush through this and move on with our lives. We need to honour the long history of pain by remaining there and allowing it to work and change in us. Because this psalm here, 130, shows us that lament leads to penitence, leads to salvation. The night of danger gives forth to the morning of salvation. But the dawn breaks slowly. I was out this morning, I've been going out. My dog doesn't like the heat, so I've been going out for a walk at about between 5 and 5:30 in the morning. I set off, and it's barely light now at that time in the morning. I'm going to have to get up later, I think. But it takes a while for the dawn to come. The first light of the pre-dawn comes up and it's beautiful, but then the light grows and grows and grows. And the journey that I take on that walk, I walk through, it doesn't sound lovely, I walk through the pre-dawn into the dawn, through the rising of the sun into the day. And that's kind of what this psalm is doing, isn't it? I'm glad I went this morning now. But this is kind of what the psalm is doing, and that's kind of what we need to do right now. We're walking maybe through the pre-dawn. We've seen the light. We've seen that something is happening, and we are lingering in the pre-dawn. But we have to walk through the dawn, through the sunrise, before we can come to that place where we need to be as church. So on that note, talking of lament leading to penitence, etc., etc., just a reminder that next week, the 15th of August, we will be beginning our in-person worship in this church in the building behind me. It's so exciting, but we're beginning with a service of lament. Now, I know some of you have questioned why we need a service of lament. The reason that we're doing that is because several parishioners, quite a few parishioners, have said that they feel there's been so much hurt. We've been through so much in the last 18 months with COVID and the what I was saying about the Indigenous history with our church. So many people have passed away, for example. We've not been able to mark that in the way that we would, and when we gather back in church, they won't be there. So we need to acknowledge how we're feeling. We can't pretend that none of that's happened. So we're going to start with this service of lament. If that's going to be meaningful for you, I would urge you to come. If it's not going to be meaningful, if you don't feel that in the need, then by all means, wait until the following week before you come back to church. But that's something that's happening next week. It's going to be in two parts. We're going to start, and I better not give you a firm time. We haven't decided. We'll be deciding later today. But we're going to start the service with a time of lamentation and reflection. And then there's going to be a period of time where the church will be open for quiet prayer and reflection. There'll be some prayer stations in there. And then we're going to have a second section of the service, which will be turning our sorrow into joy, and we're going to bring it round so we can free ourselves to rejoice once more. So please, if you're interested in that, keep an eye on the website, and notice is coming through the office if you think you might like to be there. And so that's all for this sermon today. So I have spoken in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. So I will see you either in person or on the screen next Sunday. Thank you for joining us. Bye.